I am in the Simpich home today, and I have to say it's been a difficult season for us here. This is September, and we lost my dad in August 15th, and he was 94, and so our home is not the same. But I have to say, we are thankful that he was such an incredible artist, and his artwork is really ministering to us right now. And I wanted to share with you a very special table that I set up in honor of his 94th birthday back in January. And birthday tables are something my wife Debbie and I have done for many years. Not every year, but when our kids were growing up, we would kind of find out what they were interested in and do a special table for them. We had mermaid tables and dinosaur tables and a Pilgrim's Progress table and on for our kids growing up. And when we were preparing for my dad's 94th, I decided to do a table that would celebrate two very special gifts that my dad was given. Now, first and foremost, my dad was a painter, but he had a lot of creative energy, and that came out in lots of different ways. And of course, for 54 years, he helped my mother with the Simpich character doll business. But a special avenue for my dad was the creation of the Simpich elves. And he put his energy and his creativity and his joy into these characters. And so that was one ingredient of the table that I set up. And the other ingredient was his pottery. Now, when I was growing up, my dad had a potter's wheel, but I guess back in Missouri, when he was going to the University of Missouri, he was not yet a potter. And one night he was working at the Student Union building, and they had a potter's wheel there. I think he worked at the snack bar or something, and they shut the Student Union down, and he decided he would go over and experiment with the potter's wheel. Never had done this before. So he got a wad of clay and threw it on the potter's wheel and tried, and he sprayed clay all over the Student Union building and had to clean it up during the night before anyone saw it. But later, when he moved to Colorado, he decided to design his own potter's wheel, and he got a motor, and he adjusted with the foot pedal so it could go fast and slow, and he threw pots till finally he was able to throw a pot like this. This one's my favorite, and a simple, really, design for the actual structure of the pot. But my dad, the painter, used glaze to do this whole scene. And for years and years, he'd keep his brushes in this pot. And I'm going to take us on a little trip around the table and show you kind of what I set up in honor of his 94th birthday. Okay, well, here's an example of one of his pots. And I would know this design was my dad's, at 100 feet. Because it just looks like my dad, and he was experimenting with glazes and different kinds of firing. So here we have the pot, and does it have a date on it? 1965. I think that seemed to be a time he was doing a lot of pottery. And then to set it in the scene here, that's just there with some pine cones in it. But we have three of the elves who are kind of in a little scene. Gusty here has climbed up on one of Dad's pots and has lit this candle and has blown the match out. And then Sparky, the fireman elf, is on hand because he's a little worried about how that's going. And then we have Waituki looking on, and he also looks worried. And I kind of wired, well, I did wire carefully Gusty to the candlestick and the pot to make sure he'd stay in place. So that little scene's going on. And then maybe we'll just move down here to Papa. Now, I had to very carefully wire Papa to a special platform inside the pot so we didn't lose him, because it'd be very, very dangerous for him if I didn't work that out. So this is a wonderful pot. I think my dad did this in the 90s, and he worked with his calligraphy and experimented with ways of having that worked out with the glaze, and it's kind of a relief. The glaze is actually the blue, and the pot is where we see the word joy, one of my dad's favorite words. And there we have Papa with the little baby elf and Dwarf looking on. So here's a fun little pot. Again, I would know that my dad did that. The energy just, it's actually, he did it in relief again because the glaze is the blue. And I don't even think this one's, probably needs another firing or two. But I placed some Trump headlines in this little pot. And this gentleman was designed by my dad actually in the 50s. He was one of the really early elves, the head design. And he was a mountain climber, and I'm going to show you the mountain climber here in a moment. But some years later, I think in the 1990s, they decided to give him an ear horn. He was hard of hearing, and my dad named him Trump. Trump. And this was a very long time ago. The president was in his 40s then, and wasn't as big deal as he is now. So this guy is a forerunner, and I'll have you know he's very bipartisan. But I have him here next to the headlines, and he's listening to them and trying to figure out why his name keeps coming up so often in the headlines. So actually my dad would sit here at the table, so that was just right there, but I wasn't sure what Dad thought about that little idea. This is Leapin' Lurchin. Dad designed a frog, and he is riding the bucking frog here. So this is Leap, and this is Lurchin, or perhaps this is Lurchin and this is Leap. I'm not sure, but that was a fun elf that was very popular. So here we have Rip, and he is leaning against this pot here that Dad designed. He is actually one of the very last Simpich elves, and he was designed around 2005, possibly, maybe 2004. Very hard to come by. They didn't make very many of him. Very special elf. And I'll set him aside and show you this very special bowl that my dad designed. He actually did the calligraphy into the clay when the clay was still wet enough to have that happen. And he did lots of scripture on pottery, and this verse, I will do my best to read it. At an acceptable time, O God, in the abundance of thy steadfast love, answer me. And Chester is wired into this pot with his chestnut. I think I named him. I recall that we were in a meeting and trying to come up with elf names, and I think I named him Chester and thought he could hold a chestnut. Now, this is a wonderful pot. I don't think my dad designed this one, but it's a great pot. And Mr. Dinwiddie is popping up out of the pot. My dad had this in his collection. Not only did he create pottery, he and my mother did collect it. They both love to have it around. And moving on down. So here we have Trump, who was not named Trump back in the 1950s. Same head that my dad designed. This belonged to my grandmother, Nana Nick, and he is a mountain climber or a rock climber. But he's got all his gear here, and I put a piece of rope, and he is preparing to climb this piece of pottery to meet Nappy up at the top. And Nappy is one of the newer elves, and I positioned him sleeping in this rather large pot that my dad designed. And so we have that little scene, and then right next to that we have the other side of the Gusty scene, which shows Gusty a little more, how he's positioned, and he has some burned out matches there. He's been working really hard to get the candle lit, and we have some other elves looking on. Now there are some other elves interspersed in this display, but this is the last main vignette, and we have Balderdash, who is one of my very favorite Simpich elves, and I remember my dad wanted him holding a donut, and he wanted his name to be Balderdash. And I asked him why, because, you know, oftentimes Balderdash is sort of a, you know, a nice G-rated sort of swear word. But he said his name is Balderdash and he's holding a donut. But he's one of my favorites, has the real little wire glasses on there. And he and Kuchen, also known as Kuchen, the chef elf, one of the chef elves, there's another one named Pierre, are on either side of a pot holding donuts. I think we had some Cheerios standing in, but I really wanted to find something really interesting and different to put in every single pot, and I could not come up with it, and so a lot of them ended up with pine cones. But I did come up with little donuts, little elf-sized donuts for this pot, so they could be discussing the making of the donuts here. And my dad made this, designed this for my mother in 1956, April 56, and it says to Jan. So a nice little blue pot for her. So that kind of completes the vignettes here. I wanted to tell you a little bit about these candles. I've been using LED candles more and more, and I love these because they don't drip and you know, cause all kinds of problems with, you know, the votives breaking from too much heat. These actually go off with the remote here, and I can actually set a timer to have them come on for 4, 6, or 8 hours and go off again, and they'll do it every day. So I love the little votive candles, and that was a nice little thing that I kind of discovered around the time I set this table up back in January. So again, the Simpich Home is really missing my dad right now. I'm thankful for his art because over and over it expresses his heart, his joy, and just kind of what motivated him. And I definitely feel that way about the elves and about his beautiful pottery. And it's fun. You know, the elves are wonderful because when my dad was designing them, he just knew that you could play with them. There's so many things elves can do, you know. This is just one of a myriad things the elves can do. Make a scene, tell a story, and so they are fun to play with, and we certainly have done a lot of that through the years here at the Simpich Home. There is a PS on this. Let me run over here and get Chester. We were discussing this as we were making this video. Chester is actually holding a walnut, and I think, I honestly don't know the details on that, but probably an actual chestnut would rot. They're fragile, they have a lot of moisture in them, so we have a walnut standing in for a chestnut, and his name is Chester, and rather than Wally. So we wanted to let you know that we have our categories of different nuts of straight. So there you go.